Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the top 10 best Arc Hunters, so let's just get straight into it. In at number 10, I've decided to put the Theri on the list actually, not only because its saddle unlocks at level 69.
Nice.
But simply because this is really great for the old hunting, and it does make sense. It is on the list after all. It's a great gatherer too, but considering it's a herbivore, it really does deserve to be on here as a hunter because it can gather all of those resources up after killing a corpse. If you get something like a trike or a stego out, it's going to have no chance in gathering up all the necessary resources from just the creature that you've just killed. Whereas the Theri can, and obviously that's not just the reason why I put it here. It would be a little bit stupid to do that. It is also just because it does a hefty amount of damage. You can go hunting with this creature with absolute ease. You shouldn't have too much issue overall with a creature like this. They are almost pristine for a herbivore in terms of the hunting, but you could obviously sort of tell why they're so good for all of their hunting. Their claws are just absolutely massive. You're going to get a lot of mileage out of them. If you want to do the dragon as well, you can do it with Theris much more easily than if you're using something like Rex's actually, because it's particularly particularly damaging to carnivorous creatures, where this is a herbivore and its fire attack is not going to do nearly as much damage. Continuing on, we've got the Rhynio, and this really does need to be here. Although not a hunter I use a lot, it does deserve to be on the list for its hunting prowess. It is quite a great creature in that aspect. It can pick up loads of creatures too and just smash the hell out of them, and it obviously can just smash the hell out of most creatures with no issues whatsoever. I have no real issues fighting down creatures with something like this. It is extremely good for the job. It's just maybe you could use this thing for travel, and that's what I use it for more, and maybe some PvP combat too. Obviously it's not allowed into boss fights, but I think the reason why it's slightly further back is maybe the creatures further on the list are sort of slightly better at the hunting part. It's still great, it does tons of damage and you can get a lot done with it, but there's some other creatures out there which I think do a better job, and it is also sometimes a little bit of a marathon to get yourself a Rhynio. Sometimes maybe not worth it. For the hunting side of things, the Theri is a much safer bet in that regard, but I have to put this thing in at least not the number 10 spot because it does definitely deserve something. I'm not hating on the Rhynio here. I do really love this as a creature, and it has a lot of versatility, and loads of players have really been using this thing to the fullest. But if you saw those resources on screen, sometimes, especially if you want to get 100% effectiveness, it's going to be quite a lot of work for this thing. Continuing on, I've got to put the Crystal Wyvern on because yes, the Wyverns are great combat creatures and great hunters, but the Crystal Wyvern is just such an easy tame. It deserves to be on the list here for me. While the turning cycle isn't the best on these things, you can go out and you can get quite a lot of damage done with a creature like this, especially the Blood Crystal Wyvern. That is my preferred Wyvern of choice. You can just rip creatures to absolute shreds with a Wyvern like that. And again, they're insanely easy to tame compared to the normal Wyvern. They are so minimal effort to tame, you could say. Essentially you need to be level 60. That can be very easily done with a note run, then knock out a Crystal Wyvern. Very easy to do now that you have the net gun and all of that. You can just take one of those with you, net gun one of these things and trank it out, and then boom, like that, take the Primal Crystal from it, and then you've just got to passive feed the Crystal Wyvern that you want. Make sure you've got enough Primal Crystal as well. Maybe knock out a few Wyverns. Again, with the net gun it really isn't too difficult, and then you've got yourself one of these things. In my opinion, it's a way nicer method than going down into the Wyvern trenches, and I do vastly prefer it from that. And it's a really great hunting creature for me as it deals a lot of damage, and it's insanely easy to tame. I can get them whenever I want, even if I'm starting out fresh. Again, it really doesn't take me too long, and within my first session I'm already up and running with Crystal Wyverns. In at number 7 we have got the Thyla, and come on, this really does deserve to be here. It's one of those creatures where they're just so mobile. They are really good hunters, and of course they have the bleed ability too, and you really do have to put them on the list there for it. These creatures are just so versatile in the way that they hunt, and they're not too difficult to tame. Again, a simple trap will get you there, or the net launcher if you've got that net gun, whichever thing you want to call it. It's one of those. Again, I don't really mind what you call it. I know what you mean by net gun or net launcher. you know, there's a gun and it launches a net, or a net launches from a gun. It depends what perspective you want to look at it from. But as you can see there, that raptor just completely demolished like that, no issues whatsoever. Creatures like this are just such a blessing to have in Ark Survival Evolved, and I love that the Thyla is included in Ark. Of course, it's been in the game for a while. It spawns on the island too, which means it's just so accessible for everyone out there. Like, you look on some other maps and, you know, especially if they're not free DLCs, I get a little bit iffy when it comes to lists, although, you know, we have got a paid DLC creature. Originally it came on a paid DLC, but you can get it on Fielder now. Come off the number 3 spot, but Fielder kind of evens things out again, because, you know, yeah, some people say, well, why don't you just get all the DLCs? Some people just only have, you know, the base game, or, you know, the base game with the free DLCs if they've installed those up. Personally, you know, a lot of people from my point of view have that, as they haven't bought all the DLCs. It can be a little bit of a marathon sometimes to buy all the DLCs, seemingly. I obviously have them, but, you know, that's for content purposes rather than playing. But I did get them before, but you know what I mean. Like, I got Bob's Tall Tales for content purposes, and I haven't even made a video on it yet, but we'll probably get around to that. Now, the Giga and the Carcharodontosaurus are going here, so don't say I didn't put the Carcharodontosaurus on the list. I'm putting it here with the Giga. I think they both tie hand in hand in a way for hunting. They're insanely great for killing creatures, but I'm putting them this far back on the list as I think they lack in terms of, you know, ease to tame and actually just getting them in the first place, which has to push them back instantly, in my opinion. If they're really easy to tame and they're great at doing their job, then they can go way higher. These things are great at doing their job, but it can be a little bit of a pain to tame. The Carcharodontosaurus can be a bit annoying as well, and sometimes can be a bit buggy and glitchy. You do know how Ark works after all, and some more complicated tame methods can tend to go wrong just from the game side of things rather than just your side. But there's no doubt in saying that they both are incredibly, insanely good at just hunting in general. They really do pack the punch when it comes to damage, and their health is enough to easily withstand any hunts that you're going to need to go on in the Ark map, because we're not really talking about bosses here, and these are only really useful on extinction for bosses, as they're not even allowed into boss fights on general maps, as they're seen as too powerful. They simply both did have to make a spotlight in this list, and so that's why I'm putting both of them here. In at number 5, we've got the Baryonyx. And why would you put this thing above the Giga, the Carcharodontosaurus, the Thyla, the Crystal Wyvern, the Rhynio, and the Theri? Well, I really love what this thing does for water hunting and underwater hunting, and although maybe you don't do it a lot, it's a whole other dimension to it, and it can do basically all that the Thyla can. Maybe not quite as much mobility, and it does lack the bleed ability. It would be so insane if this creature had the bleed ability. But I still think the fact that all of that underwater stuff is accessible with a creature like this, it deserves the number 5 spot, putting it middle of the road. And also for caving as well, it is unbeatable still to this day. I love this creature's caving capabilities, and it is still an extremely mobile one. It can jump around, it can stun creatures as well on underwater hunts. That is an extremely incredible thing to have. Obviously, it can only stun creatures up to the size of Megalodon. If I haven't said that already, my memory is fading at the moment because it's a little bit late at night as I'm recording this, but yeah, you know, that is going to be extremely useful, and for caving as well. But caving and hunting, you're probably going to do maybe a little bit of hunting in a cave, because you'll hunt down some creatures and kill them. Again, I'm slightly flexing the words, but still, you know, given combat scenarios, they're going to do quite exceptionally well, especially if you've got a reasonably leveled one. And at number 4, I simply have to put the Rex just on what it's done for hunting in Ark, and while maybe some would use it more as a boss creature, the Yuty deserves a spot as well. I'm putting the Rex and the Yuty both in the same spot like the Giga and the Carcharodontosaurus, because that Yuty buff is just insane. And I think, yeah, although I don't use them a lot for hunting, I use the Yuty more so actually than the Rex. They deserve the number 4 spot in my opinion, because I prefer all the creatures further along on the list for hunting. But the Yuty and the Rex are the OGs, and they've done so much for hunting in the grand scheme of Ark, and they were definitely my saviours earlier on. I know the Yuty didn't come around until 2017, the Rex more so, which is why the Rex is here rather than the Yuty in terms of the B-roll. But there is a Yuty in the B-roll. I know I'm killing it, but, you know, that's the Yuty's spotlight. But I still think it is a really useful hunter, obviously, for that ability, and it can actually deal quite a reasonable amount of damage as well. They're not going to be the most mobile. The Yuty's obviously way more mobile than the Rex, especially in water scenarios. I know you're not really going to be doing much with water and a Rex, but still you might have to cross a lake or something, and it can just be a pain. They're not the most mobile things out there, you can probably tell, but they deserve to be here for what they've done in Ark and just how long they've been here and how they're still used and great to this day. There will never be a day, in my opinion, where I think these creatures will be underappreciated for what they've done in the Ark community, as they really have stapled themselves as some incredibly great creatures that we can all love and use. In at number 3, I've decided to put the Shadowmane, as this is insanely great underwater like the Barry, but it's better. I'm pretty confident it doesn't have the bleed ability, but it does have the hydration buff. It does have the bleed ability. Sorry to the Shadowmane, I just haven't used it in a bit. I haven't been doing much Ark lately actually, because music has been getting in the way. I don't know why I said getting in the way, but I've been doing a lot of that at the moment, which is why maybe I've been a little bit more absent in some regards, but still I'm kicking around, still recording all of these videos daily, I guess. But you know, I haven't really done much Ark playing, is what I should say. So sorry if I did get that wrong. Comment it down below if I did get it wrong as well, because I definitely do need to correct it, especially because the Shadowmane does come up quite a lot in these top 10 lists. It's a great swimmer, you know, which is why it's such a great underwater hunter, and you know, the hydration buff just really does buff you down there, as it suggests. And it's a great combat creature just for its high mobility and high damage output. The only reason why it's not a little bit further ahead is its taming method really does suck. Now, I have to put the Desmodus here as such a great hunter, as the use of what you can get from the hunt with a creature like this, if that makes sense to you, because these creatures have Sanguine Elixir. From you hunting around and gathering up all those blood bags and things, if you want to get Bloodstalker as well, it's amazing. And more Desmoduses, of course, those blood bags are going to be incredibly useful. But that Sanguine Elixir is so good for tames. 30% of it is done. You just simply have to put it in their inventory and press whatever button it is for you. Or it could be a click, that's still a button, what am I talking about? Whatever button it is for you to like do the thing. The consume button, for me it's E, because PC player. But actually comment down below, what is your consume button in Ark from you console players to us PC players? And if you are someone who changes the key bindings around, what have you changed it to? Because I do want to know, actually, because I find it quite interesting sometimes, especially if you leave your reasonings down. Sometimes you don't really have a reason and you just do it, and you know, it's always a thing with me. I like crouch on X rather than C, but that's just my hand positioning, I guess. They're also just really great gliders as well, the Desmodus. And coming in at number 1, we've got the Deinonychus. Still, for me, in the hunting space, the Dine is unbeaten at being a ridiculously easy tame on Crystal Isle. Simply steal the egg from the Deinonychus nest and raise it as your own. Yes, then obviously you can get a nice high level breeding pair, but you can go for a high level straight away. Even low level ones though will do great, and then you can have yourself an even better version of the Deinonychus. Now when you get some mutations on it further and further, they do become even better creatures. But even a low level one right off the bat is going to do insanely well for your hunting. They have the pack buff, obviously the bleed ability. They're especially great at hunting larger creatures, as you can just absolutely tear them to shreds by gripping onto them. That pack buff is going to vastly improve the amount of damage you're doing though, and with mate boosts on top of it, and obviously that insane bleed ability, it really does make quite a lot of difference in the hunting space. You're going to have a great time. Not to mention that these creatures are insanely versatile when it comes to their movements. They really don't lack, and they take no fall damage too. You obviously don't have to worry about other creatures in your pack. If you do hunt with more than one creature, it will vastly improve your damage output, of course, obviously just having more creatures there. But still, maybe there's some diminishing returns with creatures getting stuck all over the place. Sometimes it's just nice to go solo, and then you know, you're just perfectly just with yourself and nothing has been left behind. But you can always use the Awesome Spyglass, not the Awesome Spyglass, Creature Finder Deluxe, to help you out if you know, you ever thinking of downloading mods. That is quite a good one. Not sure what it's called on ASA, but on ASC it's called Creature Finder Deluxe. In at number 10, we have the Rock Drake, and in my opinion, this creature had to make the list, as it is an absolute cheese on Aberration for defeating Rockwell. And although maybe that's not the biggest percentage of all Ark maps, only being one of the main maps, which I think there are like 6 or 7, but still, I think considering how easy that boss is made because of this creature, it deserves to be on the list. And also it just is a great creature apart from that, but there's not really many other uses on other maps for this creature. You can't really use it for other bosses, and also just transferring from Aberration can be a huge pain anyway, so you always want to be quite careful with that. But considering these creatures being just so great for doing any cheesing of the Rockwell boss on Aberration, I think they just had to make the list. Although yes, more of a rare case, still to me it really does just it deserves to be here. Next up we have the Megatherium, and this creature again has a more specific case, although you can use it for a lot of bosses out there, although its main use is for any boss that has the Broodmother or just the Broodmother included, as sometimes some maps just like to mash together a couple of bosses and then just make that the final boss of the arc map. And you can kind of say the Overseer sort of does that as well, but you know, that's a little bit of an unworthy case, I would say, because you know, there's loads of other bosses you're facing as well at the same time, and you've got the Overseer, really not very useful for that fight, although they can get through the tech cave with relative ease compared to something like a Rex. But the reason why these things are actually just so good at defeating things like the Broodmother is because of a ability which they have, which allows them to deal insane damage to insects, and they can get that by killing an insect. And maybe you might think, well, you just have to kill the Broodmother and then you get the buff. Well, the Broodmother spawns loads of Rhynio minions, so it's really easy and quick to get that buff. And then if you have a UT buffing it on top of it as well, it really does play a huge part in any kind of given boss scenario. And actually, talking about the UT, I didn't put it on this list, and I didn't put the Daedon on it either, but I'm going to give them a quick mention here, as they are pretty much largely essential boss creatures, although maybe not strictly necessary for dealing that damage. They really do increase your chances of winning a fight, and I kind of feel bad for not mentioning them. Next up, we have the Megalosaurus, and this really is a great boss creature, especially for maps like Aberration, again, although it is useful on some other maps too, so it had to be included on this list in my opinion. Like, you look at this creature, it really does pack a punch in the damage department, and they're quite small, so if you want to get through the tech cave, you're not going to have too much of an issue, especially on ASA, because of the Dino implemented features where they can actually go round objects and be somewhat smart compared to just normal arcs, where they'll just take the shortest path, or at least try to, and then probably just end up falling into some lava, and then you won't end up having a particularly good time, and really not going to sit nicely for an experience for you. And you can actually see one of the abilities here. This thing is gripping a Microraptor from its mouth, and it just tears it to shreds, and then once it's dead, you can just keep going with your life, I guess, as an arc creature. But it's kind of nice because Microraptors are absolute pests, although you don't really find them in any boss environment. Quite useful for some Dimorphodons on the dragon boss fight. Those, they can quickly snatch those up and kill them, as they are an absolute nuisance as they damage the rider, and they can really decrease the chances of you actually winning that boss fight. So that is an extremely great use of these creatures. If you don't have Theres, I would recommend using the Megalosaurus, or the Megalosaurus and some Theres, so you can get those Dimorphodons, very different creatures, taken out while still being able to not have all your creatures die because of the incredibly OP fire buff, which really does hurt any kind of carnivorous creature. Speaking of the Theri, in number 7 we do have the Theri, and I kind of talked about the rationale behind this creature being here, and it is really great for the dragon boss fight, or any boss fight that has the dragon in it, of course, as it's gonna have that fire ability, which is not going to be particularly friendly to any carnivorous creature, but also this thing's saddle does unlock at level 69. Now, apart from that absolutely amazing thing coming from the saddle level of this creature, it's also a great gatherer, although that doesn't really make it a particularly great boss creature, but it does gather fiber quite well. So apart from being a really good boss creature, this thing is really good at just general resource gathering, which is another reason to tame it if you're not thinking of doing bosses currently. And it doesn't really matter what map you're on, if a Theri spawns there, they are going to be extremely useful, as they do spawn on every map, I'm pretty sure. Like, they're kind of just that common creature that you don't not have on any given map. And although yes, on official, their taming does take a little bit of a while considering their size, but it's mainly just because of the food you give them. It's a lot easier to get prime meat than some like vegetables, which you obviously have to grow and you have to do that hard process. You can use kibble, of course, but still, generally this is going to take a lot longer than a carnivorous tame, but it still is well worth it, especially if you're thinking of doing the dragon boss fight, or if you just really need a lot of fibre in your life. Next up, we have the Giga, and this thing has to be included here for its insanely great use on extinction. Although nowadays there is one creature which has sort of replaced it, which is later on in the list, and you'll hear about that creature maybe in just a couple of minutes. And either way, this creature, if you can tell already, deals a huge amount of damage, and it really does have the health to pack a punch as well. It makes it a really useful creature for that. Its only real downside is its rage meter and its terrible stamina. Although you probably won't be riding this creature when using it, considering that they're mainly used for the Titan boss fights, and you're going to have loads of these things anyway, and you might be riding something like a mech, or maybe just another equivalent creature, although you can end up on Gigas at some point. You might want to use the Yuty to buff it up, although you really don't want to get near that damage zone, as that Yuty is going to die very quickly. And if you're doing the Desert Titan on extinction, you're going to want to use a Quetzal instead. You really can't use Gigas for this thing. The Quetzal is the best creature for it, so I'm going to give it a slight mention here as well, although it's pretty much only useful for that boss fight. And you can kind of say the Moser is really great for the Moda boss fight, the same as the Megalodon, although they are in extremely rare cases, and they're not even the main bosses of the map, apart from obviously that previous example, but the Moda isn't the main boss of Genesis Part 1. In at number 5, we have got the Spino, and I know I've already talked about it earlier, but I kind of want, if I was to put the UT on this list, I would put it in at this spot, as I think all the creatures past it the better, but it's kind of on par where the Spino is. It's just, you're quite limited when you've only got 10 creatures on the list, and maybe I should have spent a little bit more time thinking and considering. And for the Daedon, for that example, I would have probably put that in at like number 9, number 8. That's kind of where it sits, as is less essential. You kind of maybe put the Snow out there as well, but that is in even rarer cases, so I don't really think it deserves to make the list. But the reason why the Spino is here is because of this thing's great mobility, and it also deals quite a huge amount of damage as well, which again does play huge benefit for this creature. You can get a creature which deals insane amounts of damage and also has quite high mobility. Compared to something like the Rex though, it does lack in the health department, but it's just so mobile. It really is a creature worth considering. And actually, if I'm doing the Megapithecus at boss fight, I might actually use Spinos for it. I'll use Megatherians for the Broodmother, then obviously Theris for the Dragon, and then I'll use these things for the Megapithecus, although I have used Rexes for all 3 bosses on the island. Mainly the Megapithecus, of course. I pretty much only go for Theris if I'm sticking to just creatures on the island. Otherwise, all of these bosses can be pretty easily done with the Deinonychus, but that is much later on the list. Either way, these things have the hydration buff as well, so they're actually pretty useful for the Moda if you want to do that. On top of that, they can turn 360 on the spot, again playing to their mobility, and they can stand up on their hind legs, dealing even more damage. Sadly, they don't have the bleed ability, but still a very great boss creature. Next up, we have the Carcharodontosaurus. Sorry about that blurry picture there, I really do need to find a new one, but my previous one got deleted and I've looked, but I can't really find one. Maybe AI can do something in the future, or I'll just find that previous image wherever that thing's gone. But either way, this is essentially just the Giga upgrade. This creature is the Giga, but it doesn't have the rage buff. It deals more damage, and obviously because of that rage buff, it actually means this creature has more health, as it doesn't go into rage, and it will stay fighting right till 0 HP, which is really a huge benefit, and it makes this creature significantly more reliable to tame and to use than the Giga. Actually, maybe not to tame, because these things are really not the most reliable to tame because they're taming methods. A lot more things can go wrong. It's not just a simple knockout tame. You've got to drag creatures to it, and then after that you've got to let it eat those creatures, and it can't kill any other creatures for a significant amount of time, obviously until that blood rage fades away, because it can't be in a blood rage while you're taming it. But then after you've got it past that stage, it really isn't too hard to go around and kill loads of creatures and then actually tame it, although it's kind of sad that you get knocked off when you tame it, because you don't need a saddle to tame this thing, but then as soon as it is tamed, you do need a saddle to ride it. Just a little nitpick from me, but again, this is going to be a really useful creature for the bosses on extinction, and that's pretty much it. But it really does play a huge part, and it is a very huge damage dealer, and I had to put it on the list. In at number 3, we have the Rex, and this kind of had to be here. Okay, it's such a well-balanced carnivore, in my opinion. It just had to make the list. When you look at this thing, it deals a very hefty amount of damage. It has a very good health stat. Although its mobility isn't the greatest, you don't need that all too much in general combat scenarios, and it really does pack a punch, and it's ridiculously easy to tame, especially on ASA, as you can literally take this thing as a baby by just killing its parents and then just simply pressing a button, and unless you're on official, it will raise pretty quickly, as you can just have a Rex like that, and drops are very commonly found with Rex saddles on ASA because drops are so much more OP on ASA than just general normal Arc, kind of as they should be, and you see that in the later DLC maps of Arc when you go into like Gen 2 and all of that. Drops kind of seem to fix themselves. Don't know why they haven't really done that for the island, but maybe they're just like, it doesn't need, the island is just, it's what it is now. It's just that first map that, although it's been really well designed, it does lack in a few features that the other maps really deliver, and sometimes, you know, there are some features in the new maps you kind of take for granted, although you don't really notice that too much in your Arc playing. It's just a couple of nitpicks. When you go to like Gen 2 and all those newer maps, there's just a few things which just, they work better, not it work better. What is wrong with my grammar today? But yeah, sadly also the Rex doesn't deal with bleed ability, but it can do the raw and knock people off their riders. Again, not really too useful for bosses, but want to play with a UT and get this thing buffed even more. Its health will last in any decently long boss fight, especially on Gen 1 actually. It's extremely useful for the Master Controller, and you know, they deal a quite hefty amount of damage and are really useful for just any kind of general boss fight that isn't one on extinction. In number 2, we have got the Shadowmane, and in my opinion, this had to be here. And although its tame method is kind of a little bit annoying and a lot of things can go wrong along the way, once you've tamed a very high level male and female, you can simply breed these things and get that breeding chain going and getting yourself some really nice Shadowmanes, and then you don't have to do too much Shadowmane taming. That's why I don't really recommend going for a low level first time. Just go for the highest level you can find, get a male and a female and just get them breeding right away, because frankly it isn't really worth it. You can get better stats with breeding creatures, and they are particularly quite a pain to tame. But the thing about these Shadowmane, they have very decent damage, very decent health, and very decent mobility, and also they come at quite a decent size as well. And if you transfer onto the island, the tech cave becomes an absolute breeze when using a creature like this. But also just any general boss fight, they're pretty good for the Master Controller, although I've never used them for that. Really, I've seen some other people use it for them though, and they've been really successful with it. The reason why I haven't is they weren't actually out at the time I did the Master Controller, but I have used them for Rockwell on Gen 2 and all of the island bosses, and also all the bosses on Ragnarok, and they work really well. The only real hurdle is getting over that taming method. And finally, in at number 1, we have got the Deinonychus. In my opinion, I just have to put this thing here. The fact that this can deal bleed damage to bosses is an absolute game changer, and any of the bosses where you use Rexes or Megatheriums and Theris, these creatures are going to be extremely useful for all of those. As with the bleed ability, those bosses can be very quickly done, and you don't really have to worry about the dragon's breathing attack, as that boss is going to go through so quickly, and even when it's in the air, that health is still going to be draining down. So it really does play a huge part in the Arc boss experience, and compared to the Shadowmane, they are significantly easier to tame. Like, you compare the tame method for the Shadowmane to this thing, they are so much easier to tame, and although they aren't quite as mobile because they can't jump like 10 million feet into the air, they still do have quite a lot of mobility. They don't take full damage, they have the pack buff. Sadly, they lose on the hydration buff, but you know, you're probably not going to be using these things for the Moda, and general boss arenas don't tend to have water in it, so not too useful for boss scenarios, although it can be useful in some cases. Either way, these creatures, in my opinion, are just so good at defeating bosses. Again, I need to say it, that bleed ability really does become an absolute game changer, and just for general use as well, they're really great creatures for just killing anything and traveling the map. So they're really great multi-use creature as well, but they're mainly used for me in bosses, and I really don't know where I'd be in Arc if I didn't have the Deinonychus here. Actually, pro with the Shadowmane, but in my opinion, this is a far superior creature. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.